Welcome back. You're watching The Fix with me, Karima Brown. Let's get straight to it. Kurt, one of the things that is important is, of course, that big business needs to plow back and it needs to give back. Take us through the kind of partnerships and education programs that your organization has been a part of, particularly when it comes to, smaller and informal operators around alcohol and liquor specifically, because one of the big things that people argue about is the fact that compliance often means red tape. It often means, a set of rules that makes it almost impossible for people who have historically been locked out of the economy and that particular sector to participate and to, in fact, be rule compliant and to operate legally. What is it that big business can put on the table to, bring smaller operators on board and to formalize their operations?
Absolutely. I think that's a very important issue that we have to grapple with going forward, Karima. I think from an industry perspective, in the alcohol industry in particular, the illegal outlets outnumber the legal outlets. I think 3-1 is the best guesstimate. But, it's a false narrative that the majority of those businesses that are outside the legal framework do not want to form part of the legal framework. I think there's opportunities to assist those businesses to operate within the legal framework. Many of them are willing and want to be part of it. But as you mentioned, there are there's some red tape involved. There's some outdated legislation about zoning. We know in the townships around the country, they weren't originally zoned for business zones. And so that becomes difficult when you're expected to apply for a license and have a zoning in a commercial area when there's none in that particular township. So those are the type of things that we need to start doing. As an industry, and I'm talking about manufacturers, by law, we cannot have a direct engagement with a unlicensed business. Regulation 21 and 22 of the National Liquor Act specifically forbids that. So we need to work more directly with those unlicensed businesses, bring them within the legal framework so that they start participating meaningfully in our economy and contributing to the fiscus. Now, if we can get those things right, it will address not only these issues that we talk about, the unregulated sector, but it will also allow us to deal with issues such as alcohol-related harm. If you start bringing these businesses into the regulatory fold and you start working with them directly and incentivizing them to operate within the law, not to serve underage patrons, not to serve alcohol to persons who are already inebriated. So those are the general requirements for legal businesses. And if you can bring those businesses into the fold, it not only adds to your contribution to the fiscus, but you can also indirectly address issues of harm associated with the abuse of alcohol.
Absolutely. Amy, talk to us about where communities can come in, particularly on things like education, particularly on things like underage drinking, and where the voices of communities can actually act as guardians of some sort. I mean, every now and then you have an anti-corruption hotline being launched, but the truth of the matter is these lines often don't function after the first few days or first few weeks when the media attention is gone. What are the concrete things that communities can actually get involved in to, one, give a human face to this problem, and two, to push back and to educate people and to get buy-in that they operate and function legally, particularly given the fact that, invariably things on the illicit market is cheaper?
Thank you, Karima. As you indicated, there are various methods in place already, and from a Consumer Goods Council or the retail industry side, we've established the hotline, and as you indicated, depending on the situation in the country, people would report or they would not report. But I think reporting is a first step. Making people aware of the fact that the illicit industry is there and it exists. So it's important for people to realize how it affects their lives, how it affects the economy of the country. And I think that's where we should focus on as a start when we approach communities. Communities have got a big role to play. And this is a general issue if you look at crime in the country. communities are there to support law enforcement. Communities are there to assist law enforcement. So I think it's important that we make communities realize the important role that they have to play in terms of firstly saving the economy of the country, and secondly improving their livelihoods. Secondly, we also need to look at training of law enforcement officers, because we found that a lot of law enforcement officers would execute operations, but because of the lack of knowledge in terms of firstly product identification, and then secondly the relevant legislation that is required so that they can deal with these individuals, lacks, and a lot of the cases then fall through the mat. I think what I need to also mention that's very important, which I neglected to mention earlier, was punitive measures. I think we need to review the punitive measures in place currently, because I think it's not a deterrent. I think the current laws provide for lack of a better word, insufficient punitive measures, and people are able to deal with that and move on, and the business just flourishes. So getting community and business involved is critical, and we need to start on the lowest level with your SMMEs and work it all the way up to our big corporates, where awareness and education needs to take place. Thank you.
We see one of the things that many communities have indicated when they report corruption, they often refer to the fact that local police, local law enforcement are useless because they are on the take of these big, syndicates. And crime syndicates have, in fact, become, the big drivers of illicit trade, even though very often you see the police parading through the streets of Cape Town or Hillbrow or eThekwini, running after, the guy selling 10 loose cigarettes at a hawker store. But the fat cat who is behind the systemic, illegality around economic activity is often let off the hook. To what extent are we chasing, our tails in this issue? Shouldn't we be focusing on the fat cats, and shouldn't our legislation and our punitive measures be geared towards those people instead of rounding up, your hawkers and your informal sellers, as is often the case outside taxi ranks and train stations?
Absolutely. And I think that is where you see the weakness of the justice system, and that is where you actually see how much we can do if our justice system were to be strong as it should be, Karima. Because I guess unless and until you deal with the kingpins, unless and until you deal with the source of the problem, the root cause of the problem, dealing with the symptoms is actually not going to assist. But this is where big business, hopefully with the state allowing us, we can therefore work, with the government to actually capacitate, the state to ensure, that the root cause of the problem is dealt with. Look at the NPA, for instance. We know that when Shamila Patoy came in, he made it clear, that I don't have capacity, in the NPA. He made it clear that I don't have sufficient resources to go and recruit the capacity. He made it clear that the forensic investigators that I actually have, are not of the right caliber, not of the right standard, and I've actually lost a lot of talent and a lot of capacity, but then he was also sort of like hamstrung to say, how do I bring big business on board with their assistance, without, making the NPA seem as if it's captured by big business. So unless and until we can solve for these things, and I know that there's a big issue around trust deficit between government and business, but you can see how much it's weakening, our case as a country, and how much actually it disallows us to actually get to the root of the problem, as it were. And I think it goes back to the question that you posed at first, to say, how does, the capacity of the state really weaken our efforts and undermine our efforts as a country? And I think the answer is, that is at the center, Karima, of why we are where we are as a country. Because if we did not have to deal with that, then let's agree that we would have made a headway on a whole lot of these things, and we wouldn't be allowing these syndicates and these criminals running rampant the way they are running, because they know that they don't have it. They're actually sitting with a state that is less smarter, that is actually weaker from a technological perspective, that is actually, not as capable as it should be, and that is why we are where we are with this issue, which is rather unfortunate.
Kurt, the COVID situation has obviously seen closures of certain sectors, and we know how illicit economies operate and also criminal syndicates. They thrive during those periods. Their entire existence is based on breaking down formal power structures and finding the weak links. Can you quantify what kind of economic devastation occurred during this COVID period as a consequence of illicit trade and also, of course, alcohol having been shut down at various points during the different approaches and levels that we've had of the lockdown?
Karima, yes, the ban has been devastating for our economy and our industry in particular, but also its impact on the state. We've done an analysis and it's outdated. Unfortunately, we're busy updating that information. Hopefully it'll be available within the next few weeks. But a 2017 study suggested that the illicit economy is about 14.5% of the alcohol trade. That's looking at volumes. On a value comparison, it's about 7%. Now, that certainly tells you that the illicit operators are operating at the lower end of the price continuum. But it accounts for about 12 billion rand of sales, and the fiscus loses about 6.4 billion rand. And I heard Busi talking about the SARS mechanisms to help cigarette businesses to have somebody on site. And if you're going to recoup 7.2 billion rand in the alcohol in the cigarette sector and 6.4 billion rand in the alcohol sector, surely you can add a few extra inspectors there and be able to justify the additional expense. Look, we've had a look at SARS figures. I think it was November. They're about 28 billion rand down in terms of collections from our industry, and that money could have been used to fund this vaccine program. But, this goes beyond just the numbers, Karima. The opportunity for illicit trade to cause health problems in our sector is also a challenge. Our analysis shows that about 30%
we have to wrap up here, but
trade.
before I go, I just want to ask Business Leadership South Africa's Executive Director, Busi Mavuso, you have seen former President Jacob Zuma show the middle finger to the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, saying that he is not going to go before it. He is not interested in the decision of the apex court of the country. Quickly, Business Leadership South Africa's response to Jacob Zuma's latest move.
Karima, if we are serious about clamping down on corruption, if we are serious about giving effect to the pronouncement that President Cyril Ramaphosa made last year with regards to corruption, let's be clear that Jacob Zuma should not be given a choice. Actually, Jacob Zuma cannot be given a choice. Karima, we have a country that is sitting where we are sitting because of the actions of our previous president, Jacob Zuma. This is a man who almost single-handedly destroyed the South African economy. Now, Jacob Zuma, when it comes to the state capture project, is the #1 respondent. Now, if we can't hold him to account, how do we hope to get everyone else who was responsible and who was involved in the state capture project to come and account? So I don't think, for me, it's a matter of what needs to be done or how do we actually get him or convince him to come and actually account to the state capture project. He owes it to the 59 million South Africans. He owes it to the country. He should not be given a choice. He must not be given a choice. He must be held to account. And actually, that is what must happen.
All right, that is where we leave our conversation. Busi Mavuso from Business Leadership South Africa, of course, speaking very strongly there that Jacob Zuma must, in fact, be held accountable. Well, that's exactly where we're going to go next. So the big question is, quo vadi, Jacob Zuma? Don't go anywhere.